Good evening and welcome to The Report with me, John Rees. A British medic working in Sierra Leone has been transported to a hospital in London after contracting the Ebola virus. Officials have reassured the public that there's no risk of contagion. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has warned that the number of cases of infection could reach 20,000 and take 7 months to fix the crisis. Nathaniel Amos Sansom has this.
The Ebola crisis in the West African nations of Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone continues as governments and medical experts struggle to contain the spread of the virus. The Democratic Republic of Congo is the latest country to declare cases of Ebola, but government officials have said that it is a different strain of the disease.
Je déclare à ce jour l'épidémie de la maladie à virus Ebola dans le secteur de Djera, territoire de Boendé, district de la Chuapa, province de l'Équateur, en République démocratique du Congo.
The Ebola outbreak has so far killed 1,400 people across Africa since it began in the forests of southeastern Guinea in March. This outbreak is already one of the longest in recent years and is raising deep concerns about the damage it is doing to the fragile economies of the nations affected. In the Ivory Coast, which borders the Ebola-affected nations of Guinea and Liberia, all western land borders have been closed in an effort to stop the disease arriving in the country.
Dans tous les cas, il faut minimiser les flux migratoires parce que c'est lorsque les flux migratoires sont abondants que la maladie peut s'infiltrer facilement. Donc lorsqu'on minimise les flux migratoires, je crois que ce sont des dispositions utiles.
However, many African nations have refused to close or restrict travel to Ebola-affected countries, which is the official advice of the World Health Organization. Liberia and Sierra Leone in particular are still struggling to recover from a decade of civil war in the 1990s. The African Development Bank feels that the protracted crisis over Ebola is doing great damage to West Africa's economy.
Revenues are down. Foreign exchange levels are down. Markets are not functioning. Airlines are not coming in. Projects have been cancelled. Business people have left. That is very, very damaging. Now, add to that the fact that this is rainy season and people are not farming. So prices are going up, price of produce, at a time when purchasing power is limited. You are increasing poverty.
While the outbreak has taken place in Central and Western Africa, its victims come from all around the world. Last weekend, a British medical worker working in Sierra Leone was transported back to the Royal Free Hospital in London after becoming the first British citizen to become infected with the disease. Officials say there is no risk of contagion.
The patient has been assessed over the last 24 hours by clinicians both in this country and in Sierra Leone. What I would like to emphasize is that the risk of Ebola virus infection to the population of this country remains very low and is not changed by this decision.
Nathaniel Amos Sansom, The Report, Islam Channel.
In the show to discuss the issues is Ayo Johnson, a freelance journalist who specialises in African affairs. Welcome to the show, Ayo. So we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when the news first hit, and the World Health Organization is saying there's been a 40% increase over 3 weeks. So it doesn't look like this is under control.
Far from it. It's not under control. It's very worrying, very concerning. In fact, the health practitioners who have been going out there to help individuals are finding themselves contacting the disease and the virus itself, and they themselves are asking who can help them. So really, it's a real concern which is now spilling out on the streets and the roads and in the villages and towns across West Africa, including Sierra Leone, Liberia and Guinea, and now in Nigeria, not to mention the Congo, which is a very alarming concern for the governments of those countries, which are now saying no school, try and put a total lockdown, and for many airlines worldwide are saying they're not prepared to take the risk to fly loved ones or people from the affected areas.
So the British medic, the nurse that came back here, said that there's now a shortage of nurses and medical staff generally who are willing to treat the virus. So is this one of the reasons why it's still spreading, a shortage of medical staff?
Well, weak infrastructure, which these particular countries already had, combined with the so-called brain drain syndrome of many doctors and nurses leaving those countries over a protracted number of years to Western countries for higher wages, as we know, and of course a lack of investment over time is seeing what we're seeing now, which is that the infrastructures are not strong enough, robust enough to deal with a crisis of this level.
Well, you were just saying that some airlines are refusing to fly into the affected areas, but we also saw on that package that some governments are saying no, we're not going to limit the movement of people. Why are they doing that in the face of direct advice from the World Health Organization?
Well, I think that's poor judgment, because this virus is very deadly. We've seen already it spread from Liberia, then Guinea, and of course Sierra Leone. And we've seen that expanded to their first case in Nigeria with someone coming from that affected country. I think countries have got to take it very seriously. And what we do find is not a concerted effort by all countries in terms of a unified approach in dealing with those who are coming from a particular country. And what we find is this ad hoc, where one particular country has a policy of open to all and others saying no way.
So is those countries that are refusing to do this, is it the economic impact of closing down the borders and limiting the flights? Is that why they're not doing it?
Well, already, as we do know, the economies of these countries who are affected are being affected that much more, and people who are already living on abject poverty, who are living on margins of society, are being pushed to the edge that much more. And this compounded effort is what many governments in these affected countries, or likely to be affected, are concerned about, for which up till now they're opening up their borders because they can't take the risk or the fact that their economies will suffer due to lack of trade.
So is this, do you think this is quite a cynical decision? Because, you know, we're talking about 1,000 plus people have lost their lives here. Is what the governments are essentially saying is we can sustain that loss of life, but we can't sustain the economic damage that would result from taking these measures? Is it that cynical?
Well, not as much as that, but it's a confused picture for which the governments are not prepared for these sort of eventualities, for which their panic stations, decisions being made in a rush, not being thought out correctly, combined with panic measures, not knowing what to do. And of course, what you do find is panic by the governments. Individuals in the countries are being told to stay at home. Schools are being closed down. Loved ones who find themselves in difficult situations, not knowing exactly what to do in a crisis of this level. And the rest of the world saying, ultimately, that they're trying to protect themselves by closing shop, making sure that flights are restricted, making sure individuals with certain passports can't travel, and making sure that the virus is contained within a particular country or region.
Well, now, we discussed the last time you were in here about the threat to travellers to Hajj. Is that now, presumably, that's an increased threat since the virus itself is still spreading?
Well, a virus of this nature, which was predicted would not survive or last this long into the summer periods, which has now extended beyond that, is worrying nonetheless. But a global event like that would more than likely put the virus in harm's way with those who are likely to come into effect by its nature. And as we do know, people do cross borders, people do have several different passports. And saying that you restrict specific individuals who are coming from a specific country may not contain the virus itself, because people do travel and people do take risks.
So in response to this continued and enlarging threat, are there more precautions in place over Hajj than there were perhaps a couple of weeks ago? Have we had any more announcements from the Saudi government?
Well, the Saudi government are taking this very, very seriously. They've acknowledged the problem. They're trying to contain and restrict individuals from certain parts of the world from coming to their own country for this particular event. And of course, naturally, their measures are as good as they possibly can under the circumstances. But the question is it enough? And you're dealing with millions and millions of people coming for a protracted period of time over this event. And that's a worry, because it only takes one individual with the virus, and the rest is history in terms of how far the virus can travel worldwide.
So do you think that there is going to be a kind of a hermetically sealed, or if not hermetically sealed, a more or less sealed border between Africa and the industrialized countries now, because of the greater wealth, because of the greater infrastructure in terms of health? Or do you think this is something that will spread despite what the government's saying?
Well, what's clear is that the WHO have already expressed huge alarm in terms of the speed, the nature of the virus, and the fact that we're seeing various versions of the virus spreading up not only in West Africa but now in the Congo. That's one. Two, we're also seeing that the laboratories that they have in places like Sierra Leone are being closed down because their own medical teams are contacting the virus, and that's a worry for them. Also, we know that there isn't a known cure for the virus, despite ZMapp, which has been expressed by the United States as a cure, but not in plentiful numbers enough to help all those who are affected, combined with some other serums that have been thought about using the blood of those who'd had the virus and survived it as a mechanism of blood transfusion for those who are affected now. That's a method that was tried previously and successfully so, and the WHO is looking at those. So the question is, does the WHO have enough confidence in its own ability, its own structures, and its own doctors and nurses, who for many of them are facing in harm's way in terms of facing this virus, who, as we've seen already, many of them are catching this virus and of course seeking help themselves.
So what's the status of the ZMapp vaccination now? Because one health worker we know was treated with it and died. So it's by no means a cure.
Certainly not. And even if it was, the numbers of, in terms of the volumes that are required to treat all those who are affected now wouldn't work out at all. What's clear is that containment more than likely is what's going to ensue, which is why we're seeing many of the major airlines in places like Sierra Leone, Liberia and Guinea saying we're not prepared to do business with those countries anymore. British Airways, France, French Airlines, Belgium Airlines and so many others are saying no more flights. So those countries who are affected by this virus are finding themselves on their own. They've got to contain the problem. If not, the rest of the world is not prepared to help them, at least in terms of taking the risk with individuals leaving those countries and likely to affect their own loved ones in their respective countries as well.
And the existing vaccinations, are they of any use against the new strands that have developed in the Congo, for instance?
Well, many of these vaccines are yet to be tested on humans, with the exception of ZMapp, which has been tested under very, very difficult circumstances, of which we've had 2 or 3 successes and 1 failure in a priest who died even after had received the virus, the medicine. So the question is this virus likely to be contained through other medical mechanisms? That's yet to be determined, because what we do know is that what we do have on paper right now is not enough and cannot contain the virus totally.
OK, well, that was Ayo Johnson. Thank you very much for coming in. I'm sure we'll be returning to this subject in the future as things develop. Well, we're coming up to our first break of the programme now, but do join us after the break when we'll be discussing events in Iraq. That's after the break.